guys, welcome back to Your Mindset, Your Power. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed that when something goes wrong or you make a mistake, very often your brain's first instinct is to grab a stick and beating yourself up with it? And then you start telling yourself, I should have known better. It's all my fault. Why I can't get anything right? That pattern, my friend, actually has a name. It's called self-blame. And almost all of us do it, right? But here's something important to remember. Just because your brain says something doesn't mean it's true. So today we're going to explore why the brain does this, why it's more common than you might think, and most importantly, how you can start breaking free from blaming yourself. And I'm also going to give you some simple tools that can help you interrupt that self-blame cycle so you can stop punishing yourself for being human. So stay with me, my friend. Let's dive in. One of the reasons self-blame can feel so convincing is because of the way our brains work. Psychiatrist Daniel Amen calls them ants, automatic negative thoughts. These are the thoughts that show up in our mind automatically, even without realizing it. And one of the most common ant people experience is self-blame. But let me tell you something very clearly, my friend. Self-blame is not a fact. No, it's a pattern of thinking. And the beautiful thing about the brain is that the same brain that can create those patterns is also capable of changing them. But before we talk about how to change them, I think it would be very helpful to understand how these thoughts start in the first place. Because our brains are always on the lookout for what might go wrong. For most of human history, that actually helped us stay safe and alive, right? But in everyday life today, that same instinct can sometimes work against us. When something feels uncomfortable or confusing, the mind quickly tries to figure out why. So it starts filling in the blanks. And sometimes, actually, very often, the explanation it gives us is not even accurate. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine you send a message to a friend and hours go by without a reply. Almost immediately, the mind starts filling in the blanks, right? Did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? Did I offend them somehow? But the truth is, they must just be busy, right? They might be in a meeting. Maybe their phone is off or they run out of battery. And yet, the brain often jumps straight to blaming you. And the more we repeat that story in our minds, the more real it starts to feel. But here's the important thing to remember, my friend. The brain is very good at creating explanations. It's very good at creating stories. But the explanation it creates is not always the truth. Sometimes it's simply the brain trying to make sense of something that feels uncertain or uncomfortable. And when that story keeps repeating in the mind, something else often happens. Rumination. Yeah, that thought doesn't just appear once. It starts repeating. It lingers. It echoes. And instead of moving past the moment, your mind keeps replaying it nonstop. That's when one painful thought can start growing into something much bigger. Almost like a row of dominoes falling. You know, that one small thought knocks down the next. Something goes wrong, you blame yourself. You criticize yourself. Your confidence drops. Then the doubt starts spreading into other areas of your life. So you start questioning your abilities. You start questioning your decisions. You start doubting yourself more and more. And over time, self-blame can start to become a habit. Constantly putting yourself down, assuming the worst. And before you know it, you start thinking, Nothing ever works out for me. I always mess things up. Maybe I'm just not good enough. And suddenly the story in your head starts feeling bigger than what actually happened as you hammer yourself with those constant negative thoughts. Rumination can trick the brain into thinking that it's being productive because the brain thinks, oh, well, if I go over the problem enough times, maybe I can finally find relief. But it doesn't work that way, my friend. It does the opposite. Instead of helping you move forward, it keeps you emotionally stuck in the same painful loop. It's like a rocking chair. There is a lot of motion, mental motion, but you're not going anywhere. And there is another important piece to understand about self-blame. Because sometimes the mind doesn't just create these thoughts, it holds on to them. Not because they're true, but because in a strange way, they can feel safer. It's an unconscious way of the brain desperately looking for a reason, for an explanation. Because according to experts, if our brains believe this is my fault, it simply feels easier than sitting with the uncertainty of what really happened. It's like self-blame is often a shortcut the mind uses to make sense of something confusing. And self-blame is often a coping mechanism. It's a way our brain tries to make sense of painful situations. And that is especially true in relationships. If we blame ourselves, we feel like we still have the power to fix it or stay safe. So maybe you think, I messed up, instead of accepting that you were treated poorly by someone you trusted. And it's a habit in the mind to take on the burden of guilt to maintain a false sense of security. And also sometimes these stories start very early in life. Maybe when you were a kid, something went wrong, something broke, someone got hurt, or something it didn't go the way it was supposed to. And someone quickly said to you, who did this? Why did you do that? Maybe it really was your fault, but maybe it wasn't. And still the mind holds on to that moment. There is a powerful moment in the Lion King movie where the young lion Simba is told that his father's death was his fault. Even though it isn't true, he carries that belief with him for years. He grows up repeating the same story to himself. It's my fault. And in many ways, self-blame can work like that for us. A story the mind repeats long enough that it begins to feel like the truth, even if it isn't. But recognizing that pattern changes everything, because the moment you start noticing the story, you begin creating a little distance between what happened and the meaning your mind attached to it. And that awareness, my friend, is where real change begins. Because just because the mind learned a pattern doesn't mean it's permanent. The moment you start noticing those thoughts, the self-blame, the stories, the rumination, something very important happens. You create a little space between you and the thought. You tell yourself, that's just a thought. You become the watcher of your thought, not the thought itself. And that means you don't have to treat it as a fact. That small moment of awareness is so powerful because the brain is capable of change. Of course, in neuroscience, this is called neuroplasticity. The brain's ability to form new patterns over time. The thoughts we repeat more often strengthen certain pathways in the brain. But when we begin responding differently, even in small ways, new pathways start forming too, little by little. Then the old pattern weakens. And that means self-blame doesn't have to be your default response anymore. But sometimes this pattern shows up in a much deeper way. So before we move into the tools I promised, I want to talk about something that many people carry quietly for years. Sometimes self-blame isn't about something that happened yesterday. Sometimes it's about something that happened a long time ago. Maybe a decision we made, a decision we didn't make, a path we didn't take. Maybe it was a career choice. Maybe it was an opportunity we turned down. Maybe it was something we wish we had said or a phone call we never made. And years later, the mind is still going back there. Why did I do that? I should have chosen differently. If I only had done it differently instead. And I understand that. These moments can feel heavy in our hearts and in our minds. But beating yourself up for years about something you can't change anymore, something you no longer control, doesn't free you. It exhausts you. It drains your energy. And over time, that kind of self-blame can start affecting not only your emotional well-being, but even your physical health. So that's exactly why we're having this conversation, my friend, because the past can teach you something. It can give you wisdom. It can bring you experience. But staying trapped in that cycle of blame won't help you build the life you're capable of creating now. But the good news is this. Breaking free from that pattern is so possible. And that's where a few simple tools can make a powerful difference. So let's look at the first tool. Acknowledge the thought. When a blaming thought appears, pause for a moment and notice it. Just observe it. You might say to yourself, "Hello, thought, there you are, your blaming thought again." Just that. Not to argue with it 10 minutes, just catch it early because before it builds a whole story in your mind. And from there, instead of feeding it with more blame and more overthinking, you just question it, challenge it. Is this actually true? This way you can choose how to respond instead of letting the thought take over. Let's go to tool number 2. Get clear on what is actually yours. Because after you notice the blaming thought, pause and ask yourself a simple question. What am I actually responsible for here? Because sometimes we do make mistakes, right? Maybe we said something we regret. Maybe we handled a situation poorly. Maybe there's something we could have done differently. And when that happens, the healthy thing to do is own it. Take responsibility. Apologize if needed. Learn from it and move forward. That's how we grow. But self-blame often skips that step and jumps straight into blaming ourselves for everything. And those two things are not the same, my friend. Responsibility is honest and constructive, but self-blame is often exaggerated and punishing. So slow down for a moment, my friend, and ask yourself, what part of this is truly mine to own and what part is not? Because not everything that happens around you is your responsibility. And that simple question can lift a lot of unnecessary weight off your shoulders. Let's go to tool number 3, shift your focus forward. And this tool becomes especially important when we're blaming ourselves for something that happened in the past. Once you have slowed down and looked clearly at what is actually yours to own, the next step is to bring attention back to the present. Because blame keeps the mind stuck in the past, right? It keeps replaying what already happened. But growth happens when we ask a different question. So instead of asking, why did this happen? Why did it happen? Over and over again, ask yourself, what can I do from here? And sometimes the small answer is, maybe you learn something. Maybe you handle something differently next time. Maybe you just move forward.
The point is not to stay trapped in blame. The point is to move forward. One step can begin the break, to break the cycle. Tool number 4, speak to yourself like you would talk to a friend. That's another for shift that is changed the way you speak to yourself. When people struggle with self-blame, the inner voice often becomes very harsh. We say things to ourselves we would never say to someone we care about. So try this. Imagine a close friend came to you with the exact same situation. Would you tell them they're a failure? Would you tell them something is wrong with them? You wouldn't blame them, right? Of course not. So we need to offer ourselves the same compassion, the same patience, the same understanding we would give someone we care about. And the tool number 5, take the thoughts out of your head. I love this tool. It's so powerful. Write the thoughts down. When everything stays inside your mind, it can feel so overwhelming, right? Thoughts spin, they repeat, they mix together. I like to explain it like this. Imagine trying to solve a puzzle while all the pieces are still inside the box. You know, the pieces, they're there, right? But you can't see them. So our thoughts work the same way. When you take them out of your head and put them on paper, something changes. You start seeing the pieces. You can separate what actually happened from the story your mind created. And often, once you see the thoughts clearly, they lose a lot of their power. It's so important, this tool, my friend. All right, so let's do a quick recap because this conversation has been amazing, right? Self-blame often begins with a single thought. Then rumination repeats it. The story grows, and before we realize it, we're carrying much more weight than the situation ever deserved. But these patterns can be interrupted. You can notice the thought. You can ask what is actually yours to own. You can shift your focus forward. You can speak to yourself with kindness instead of criticism. And sometimes, something as simple as writing the thoughts down can help you see things much more clearly. And maybe the most important thing to remember is this, my friend. Having self-blaming thoughts doesn't mean something is wrong with you. No, it means your mind is trying to make sense of something difficult. And sometimes the quickest place it goes is blaming you. But awareness changes that. Because the moment you notice the thought, you no longer have to automatically believe it. You can pause, you can question the story, and you can begin responding to yourself with compassion instead of criticism. Remember those ants we talked about earlier, automatic negative thoughts? They will still show up. But the difference now is that you can recognize them sooner, before they crawl too far into your mind, before they build a whole story. And when you notice them, you can simply say, "Hello, thought. There you are, blaming thought again." Because awareness is the first step to freedom. And little by little, those old patterns begin losing their power. And my friend, I hope this episode brought you a little more clarity and maybe a little more compassion for yourself. And as always, if this episode resonated with you, share with someone who might need to hear this. And as always, again, remember, your mindset isn't just what you think. It's where your power begins. Have an amazing week, my friend. I love you guys.